Hey there, everyone. I'm Sonia Maroney, joined by my lovely co-host and better half, Jen Cameron. Welcome to our passion project and pseudo side hustle, where we ask the burning questions from some of the most fascinating leaders across the hospitality space. Good morning, Jen. We are excited about our guest today.
We certainly are. Good morning. So we have the pleasure of welcoming Derrick Johnson, the CEO of Encounter AI, this morning. Good morning, Derrick. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, we're excited to have you on. And, in our tradition, we always like to start out with a little icebreaker. So the icebreaker we came up for you was, what is a habit or an idea or a belief that you've had in the last 5 years that you've adopted that significantly changed your personal or professional life?
Yeah. So I would say my theme has been really exploring mental health over the last year, just coming out of the pandemic. One of my therapists, I call them like folks on my network, but they gave me this concept of fives, right? Which is like, through childhood trauma, through all of these things, we have fears, insecurities, vulnerabilities, expectations, and self-beliefs, right? And so through me, I found it like, hey, I have a certain patina of how I look at the world. And one of the things that changed is like always assume the best in people, right? And so one of the things that I've started to look at is like, regardless of where I go, regardless of, things that are going on, always to assume that everybody's trying to do their best in life and that everybody's trying to do their best when they interact with you, right? And to kind of remove a lot of the anxiety and the presumptions that you have around interactions as you go through life. So those are the things that I think, especially over the last year or two, has been extremely helpful for me, especially as I transform myself into a better person. So thank you. Great question.
Love that.
I love it. That's awesome. The icebreaker question is probably one of my favorite questions, and I think I learned the most from them. So I think that was really fitting for me personally today. So thank you for sharing that, Derrick. I would love for you to give our listeners a brief background on Encounter AI, how you got started. What would you like our listeners to know?
Yeah. So I professionally spent some time in research and development, working for some of the biggest, hospitality and restaurant brands in the space. Also spent some time working with very large restaurant franchisees. And so blending those worlds and synergies across both kind of Fortune 100 technology, as well as what mom and pops were doing, I kind of saw firsthand the hair on fire problem and realized that like restaurants needed transformation because largely they haven't changed in a few decades, right? And so with Encounter AI, we sought out to work with experts in the space to start to really look at their core issues and go forward from there to bring them technologies that really fit where they're looking to go over the next 5 to 10 years.
That's great. Yeah, bringing in your consulting background, of course. So, yeah, it's a great approach. So, one of the things that I thought maybe just to kind of level set for the audience was to ask you exactly what you think of as the definition of artificial intelligence, maybe even how that's different from machine learning as we kind of start the conversation.
Yeah, so they're largely blended. So for me, I look at artificial intelligence as the application of predictive power to anything, right? So predictive power in self-driving cars might be the ability to reliably make a left turn, right? And so like when you look at that, for example, crashes, right?
Mhm.
3% of crashes happen if you're making a right turn. The rest of them is left turns, right? And so when you look at something like that, being able to predict when a crash is likely to happen transforms it from what most people call deterministic programming to really a machine learning problem, right? Um, Another thing is when you really look at machine learning, um, it's all about accuracy, right? And so you're moving points and percentages and basis points to get better over time. Versus when you look at traditional programming, it's largely around either it works or it doesn't work, right? And especially as we start to try to replicate what humans do, we're largely unpredictable people ourselves, right? If you don't think so, right? And so because we're unpredictable, when most folks say machine learning, artificial intelligence are like humans, they're largely saying, hey, here's an approach where we can try to predict what historically has been unpredictable, right? And that's what helps a lot of these industries start to move forward as they try to become more human-like as they bring new products to the marketplace. Does that answer your question and provide some clarity on how I think of the landscape?
Absolutely. I knew you were going to nail that. So thank you.
No worries, no worries.
Yeah, and I guess a follow-up to that, Derrick, would be what do you think are some common misconceptions about AI?
Yeah, so I think the common misconceptions are that, I grew up in the era of Hanna-Barbera and the Jetsons and Rosie and
Mhm.
Astro. And, I think the common misconceptions are that they're going to be these sentient, like, ubiquitous, highly intelligent, all-knowing beings, right? And the reality is that they're really a mirror of what and who we are as people, right? So, we've seen major organizations, and as they start to roll out different products, you find, various languages, racism, all of these other malintent things that are just really a reflection of who we are as a society, as a community, as a globe, right? And so when you look at what artificial intelligence can do, I think oftentimes the misunderstandings is that it's going to be better than people when all it's doing is replicating people, right? And so if we can cherry pick the best of the best, absolutely, we're going to get this mirror of the best of the best. But again, I'm a subjective person. It's subjective, right? And so it's like your best may not be my best, and so on and so forth, right? And so long tail, I think especially over the next few decades, we're going to see really the personalization of artificial intelligence with the intentionality that what works best for me and my interaction with this system is crafted so that I have a unique experience, and it may be different from your experience, Sonia, or different from your experience, Jen. And with that, I think largely the technology will become more attuned to the experiences that we expect, and not necessarily the ones that the designers today want us to have, if you will. So.
Gosh, that's a really good point. I just
Mhm.
realized that natural or artificial selection and artificial intelligence are probably saying the same thing, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, natural
Took me
selection, right? Which
36
is
years.
like you say, if you believe in that, right? Like the archetype, the background is like, hey, survival of the fittest, right? So like you're really saying artificial intelligence when it does what it does, when it processes, if we're doing audio space, it's processing audio. If you're doing images, you're starting to see where, there's creative exploration of how folks and artists can now talk to a prompt and get things generated, things of that nature, right? And so, at the end of the day, I think largely we're going to continue to see growth in this field. So.
Yeah, well, and speaking of growth in the field, I mean, you couldn't be, coming to market at a better time. I know you've been working on this for some time, but drive-through is where everything's at. And I know there's, you can do kiosks, you can do a number of modalities, but the drive-through specifically has had a number of innovations just over even the last year or 2 years. So when you're seeing all those innovations come together, where do you feel like your technology fits within kind of that ecosystem?
Yeah, so I think at the entry point, it's largely around understanding the customer holistically, providing them a customer experience they're happy with. And I think long term, providing business benefits for the restaurant franchisees to see material advances, right? And so when you look at, for example, today, I think pre-pandemic, roughly 75% of all traffic for restaurants went through the drive-through. Today, I think that's closer to like 95%, right? And so if you
Wow.
understand that like the DoorDashes and Uber Eats that you order now go through that same drive-through, right? Folks who now have an affinity to not go in stores where previously they may have went and sat for a few, minutes to hours, they're no longer going in stores. And so when we look at the externalities of that, that means that you have this physically landlocked space that you can expand, where you can only improve speed of service by finding technologies that can make these operations faster, right? And so in particular, especially when you call out the drive-through, I think it's an extreme opportunity for restaurant owners as well as for customers to figure out how they want interactions to go in the future, right? When we look at the, advancement of motor cars, decades ago, folks used to come out on roller skates, right, and deliver your food and do all of these things. And so I think we're at that same juncture with current technology now, where we really have a huge opportunity to envision what we want these interactions to look like as we go forward. So thank you.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And there are great opportunities and, being able to help these restaurant operators. So, when we think about the QSR space, what problems, do you think you're specifically solving for the restaurant operators?
So, the biggest things when we went out to market and talked to franchise owners as well as, the global conglomerates is that, historically going to work for a restaurant was the first job that most folks had in their neighborhoods, right? And so, Johnny would turn 16, he would get a work permit. He's either front counter or back of the house flipping burgers, right? Today, that labor force isn't showing up in the volume it historically has, right? And so the first thing we're kind of solving is this notion of scalability, right? We hear it oftentimes in the technology space, but it's never really been used in brick and mortar talking about how people operate and do their jobs, right? And so when we look at how do we now scale operations from that one person that may be operating in the middle of the country, how can they now help operations on the West Coast, on the East Coast, so on and so forth, to really scale the day-to-day interactions of what the brand could bring and how the brand could operate. And so I think that's the first. The second one is speed of service, right? The brilliance, I think, of technology is that computers are faster than people, right? And so where restaurants may need to dial up speed, they have those levers, right? So if you come off hours and it's not the breakfast, lunch, or dinner rush, and there's time to really curate these crafted experiences, I think restaurant owners don't have any problems. But if you're peak of the day and the line's quadruply wrapped around the corner, there's just speed of service time that they're trying to put back on the wall that technologies like ours bring to the market. And then I think last is really around what you're going to see in the future around personalization, right? I go to a big brand restaurant and I've had the same order since I was a little kid, right? And so the traditional upsells that I get, I've heard them for 20 years, right? It's nothing that, is novel or new. And so I think, especially as we look for customer retention, how you engage that customer and the delights that you can provide them along this continuum, I think will create brand loyalty that oftentimes they don't have today. And so I think that those are the spectrum of things that are coming to market that specifically we're bringing that can transform the restaurant landscape.
Yeah, that's stuff I get excited about as you're talking about it. So it's all
Yeah, no,
fascinating.
it gets
Yeah.
gets me up in the morning, keeps the smile on my face. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm hoping you're going to reference your chocolate milkshake at some point. So I think that's a great.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I always tell folks, and again, it all depends on where you fit on this spectrum. But like, I love chocolate milkshakes, right? And so, part of when I thought about the genesis of this system is like, good or bad, somewhere there's that motto there, right? But like, long term, potentially there's applications where we can begin to share this data, right? So when I go to the Michelin star restaurant and they have a world-class chocolate, cake or whatever, like the benefit for me as a consumer is that like maybe somebody told that person, right? So now they're not selling me raspberry, they're not selling me, the peach malva or anything like that. They really know what I love and enjoy. And in particular, they can optimize around that, right? And especially when we look at like loyalty programs and things of that nature, outside of the big brands, they haven't been widely adopted, right? But like if I go to your smaller brand X and I'm like, hey, this is the 5th time you've been here in a month and you always order chocolate shakes, hey, the shake is on us this time, right? And it's just this trivial thing that keeps me there as a customer that I think is severely underutilized given where we can go with this technology. So
Yeah, I love a surprise and delight for sure. It's an underutilized phrase in loyalty as well. So I'm glad you said that. So you touched on it a bit, just kind of answering that question from Sonia, but what else do you get excited about that Maya's going to be able to do to enhance that customer experience beyond kind of the loyalty piece?
Yeah, so I think beyond the loyalty piece, the long tail that we can get into from a technology side is customer identification, right? Another thing I think is going to be huge is back of the office support, right? So right now we're focused on front of the house, but as you can imagine, sometimes folks need a refill on the ice cream machine, right? Sometimes folks need for like the managerial staff to do end of the day reconciliation. And so like providing also additional layers of assistance so that all of the totality from the restaurant can benefit, I think long-term is what you're going to see, right? I think that where they can be valued from voice is anytime there's an interaction that takes more than 3 to 5 seconds, there's benefit where you can have a voice apparatus that helps to accelerate that. And especially when we talk about both frontline and back of the house workers, I think this has a tremendous chance to transform the industry. So,
Cool.
Well, Derrick, you started mentioning earlier about, how people are going through the drive-through more. We're seeing an uptick, an increase in that. And so, when we look at AI, how do you see how that's going to impact the drive-through industry, at least in the short term, immediately?
yeah, so I think the short term is largely beneficial, right? I think the short term is, especially post pandemic, you have a lot of brands that really still have their hair on fire, right? And, you have underperforming stores where their core traffic hasn't come back, right? And so they're looking for ways to really provide that same level of quality service that you love, but also doing within the economic constraints that they're currently under, right? And so I think the short term is going to be no different than self-checkout things at your grocery stores that you're starting to see come up, which is like it's a short-term solution for essentially the bleeding that's going on, right? But as you can imagine, regardless of where you go, there's also externalities on the other side. Well, and so, but for us, when we look at it, the short term for these restaurant owners is they can put people back in place to really give their customers an exceptional experience, right? And that's where we're trying to go. Our vision is like, can, brand X, can a McDonald's or a Sonic's or a Burger King, can we have Michelin star quality there as well? Because these folks are now wrapped with AI and artificial intelligence, and they can respond to the needs of the customer at a level we've never seen before, right? And ideally, that's the world I'd like to live in, right? It's like great customer service is great customer service, right? I don't think it should matter, the class of institution you happen to be dining in. And I think especially when we look at what technologies can do in the short term, I think raising that floor of what customer service can look like is one of the low-hanging fruits. So.
Yeah, that's great. And you touched on it a little bit leading into kind of this next topic is, labor, right? The labor challenges that all QSRs and fast casuals and just restaurants in general are having a hard time with, right? And so there's some kind of ancillary benefits that you talk about, not even just, replacing a person that's taking the order, but retaining employees, right? Can you speak a little bit to, how you guys are tackling the labor challenges and some of the other kind of not so obvious benefits, if you will?
Yeah, so when we look at the space, right, especially from a labor perspective, the hardest hit person coming in the door is the new employee, right? They don't understand the menu, right? More than likely, their lack of understanding the menu is going to cause a frustrated customer. Oftentimes, they're either young or they're older, and emotionally, most folks don't know, but this is a very, very tough job, right? Folks come in, they're throwing all of your emotions, they're throwing their bad days at you, they're throwing all of these things that you are supposed to handle because you're giving a delight with burger and fries, right? And so when we look at it, the labor side, we help them accelerate these orders where necessary, right? By us processing orders in the background while they are talking to the customer in some instances. And just to give you clarity, we have, an unassisted model where if you don't have the staff, we can take the order end to end for you. We also have an assisted model where we just help folks get these orders into the system faster, right? And the reason that's as important is because sometimes folks really love the human element, right? We're working with a brand in South Carolina, and it was an older lady that took the orders, right? She used to be a local school teacher. And when we were going through the recordings, you could hear the delightment of these former students talking to her about their day, about their life. The daughter's now in school, the kids have went off to college, all of these updates from this communal space that we were able to remove the effort from her having to focus on orders. And so that put time back in her day to really dive in with these folks and keep up with their stories, right? And for me, that's what a lot of this is about, right? Like technology without the human benefit for me, I feel is futile, right? Like if we're going to be helping out, we have to help out in the capacity where like it benefits everybody, right? And so, yes, some folks are just going from a fiduciary responsibility to be like, hey, I need to make money and do it. But some folks actually love human interaction, and where that's the mainstay, our hope and vision at Encounter is that we could continuously create products that augment them where they want to be in the workforce and want to drive advantages, and have technologies to can ensure that they can be more accurate, potentially a little bit more faster, but they can actually enjoy those human interactions at scale, right? So
That's so relatable. You know, when I was in college, I worked in a restaurant for Tucci's and I lasted like 3 months. And it was probably my shortest, restaurant experience because of exactly what you just said. It was a really challenging job and it was extremely frustrating coming in as someone new. So I definitely needed mine in 2005.
wish I could turn back time. That's next time.
Yeah, I wish, maybe I'll go take a job at Bertucci's now if Maya's there. But another interesting part of AI is, the voice part of it. And so I guess my next question to you is, why has voice lagged behind other AI technologies like chatbots and behavioral analytics?
Yeah, so when we look at the analytics space, largely there's a lot of data over a lot of generations that have been collected, right? You can probably go back as far as Sears, right? Like understanding customer data has been going on for decades. As a result, there's maturity in those products that we missed because there wasn't TechCrunch saying, hey, Sears is now analyzing your Christmas purchases to sell you something better during spring break, right? Um, Whereas when we look at chatbots largely were created in a world for ping pong transactions, right? So it's an instance where you actually, as a person, gather your complete thought, you make sure all of the words are correct. More than likely, your web browser is going to make sure it's grammatically correct. And then you press this button and you send it across the internet and it comes back and it works, right? And so the privilege there is that a human gave a complete thought, right? And in a world where you have complete thoughts, a lot of this is really, really trivial, right? Because you've really given the system everything that it needs to process and extract, right? When we talk about something like the drive-through, right? When we talk about something broadly like voice, it's largely an incomplete thought, right? So for example, if we're talking right now, you're nodding your head, like that's just fluency, right? You're essentially giving me commentary without saying anything that I can read, right? Today, voice products, they can't detect any of that, right? As we talk, I may say, if I'm doing an example, let's say a McDonald's, right? Let me get a Big Mac and large fry and a chocolate shake, right? Because I love chocolate shakes. I'm gonna put that.
Yeah.
Right? And so with that, when I said I was actually holding the floor. I didn't want a person to respond, nor did I want a system to respond, right? Today, most systems don't take that into consideration, right? And so once you get to that Big Mac, it's going to cut you off. It's going to say, what else do you want? What did? And you're in this, I would just say, kind of unstructured approach where you've essentially went off track from how the system was designed, right? And that's largely been the struggle for audio products, right? Is humans largely are incoherent. The system's doing its best to try to make them coherent. And when it can't, it largely gets into a rules-based approach where it's trying to do its best to catch up. And largely at that point, similar to left turns and self-driving cars, it's a place where it's riddled with failure, right? The second one is around just the accuracy of voice transcripts, right? Other than some of your bigger players in the space, most folks aren't sitting on restaurant drive-through data, nor are they sitting on any real conversational data, right? When you look at some of your assistants in your homes, they may have like generations of what time is it? What's the weather? What time does my favorite TV show come on? But it's not a lot of, hey, I'm looking at getting life insurance for my family unit. What's my best options, right? And so because of that, we find a scenario where the training data largely hasn't been there on the audio side. And so there hasn't been a lot of room to discover what the opportunities can be to make it better, right? And then I think last is just around like when we talk about chatbots, like again, that coherent thought, right? When we talk about people talking, you have dialects, you have accents, you have various cadences, and all of those things change how the system responds, right? And largely, we're in a generation now where we're just starting to look at all of the underlying artifacts of how people talk to really solve the problem differently than how it was solved in the chatbot generation. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of the latency around, why these products are taking a very long time to come to market versus some of your simpler products where it's more centralized around human thought. So.
Yeah, so certainly quite different than just feeding pictures of things to a camera, right?
Well, yeah, and you got to think like, and one of the analogies I always give store owners, right? Is like you can walk outside and you're probably going to pass 100 closed circuit television cameras in 2 blocks, right? That infrastructure is already there, right? And if I asked you, what did you say on the corner yesterday? It's not a lot of infrastructure for that, right? So similar, most folks have went out and bought, an Alexa, Google Assistant, various smart home products in the space to get this capability at home. That capability is not widely distributed anyplace else, right? And so, we're cutting on 2 faucets. One is we're trying to accelerate the technology, but we're also doing, there's a thought leader called Carlota Perez. And so we're in this installation phase where we're also bringing voice compatible products to the real world in this physical space in near real time, right? And so you're seeing this attempt of trial and error in real time, where most of the time this would have happened in somebody's laboratory and it would have become a product that you just go buy and use, right? And so, we're in this space where R&D is happening real time with the customer. And so I think it's just a response is going to be a tad more abrasive than if a finalized product actually emerged and was just consumed at that point. So we ask for grace.
Well, you got to just answer my question. I was going to ask about, with all those challenges, how does your modeling change, right? And how do you approach it? You kind of went over that, but it's a good thing you're a consultant with a consultant background, right?
Ask the right questions, right? And I think even on the modeling side, right, it's largely around, it's 2, ways that we've seen these products emerge, right? The first is purely kind of a technical, theoretical approach where you're largely in laboratories exploring what the art of the possible looks like. And then you bring that to organizations like ours and then we productionize it, right? The other one is an instance where, there's what's called human in the loop, right? And so some folks in the space, there may be a call center here or a call center there. And so while you get a voice similar to your digital assistants, it's really still a person behind the scenes pressing buttons, right? And so those 2 together give you this world where, similar to, I like to use, self-driving cars as a reference. If you had somebody able to make every left turn that you did, it actually would be extremely safe. And then it could give back permission to the car to drive once you're back in the safe territory and it's only now making right turns, right? And so you're going to see as these models emerge, some form of hybridness where some portion of it's going to be technology, some portion of it's always going to be some assisted capacity, whether a person in the store, whether a person remotely. And the goal of these solutions is that they're going to get better over time. So.
Well, just to stay a little bit longer on the voice topic, being a Bostonian and having one of the better accents here in the United States, and also growing up with Italian parents, I mean, dialect is something that I feel like I have struggled with my entire life growing up. Again, having immigrant parents, people always being like, can you say that again? Again, my Bostonian accent that I've had to learn to tone down in the workplace. So my next question to you is what surprised you the most when working with all of these dialects and accents and communication styles?
Yeah. So what surprised me the most was, going back to accuracy, right? As people, we're doing a lot of real-time processing to figure out we're looking at your lips. We're running our known vocabulary in our head to say I think this is the closest word they said, right? And so when we go back to dialects and accents, we started a lot of our experimentation in college towns with the intentionality that we're going to get an influx of diversity that we probably won't get going to, just largely established major cities, right? Because most times they orient towards different, stronger demographics, right? And so to get a larger breadth of how people talk, as well as conversational styles, dialects, et cetera, we looked at it from the perspective of how do we get the most diverse set of people as seamlessly as possible? And then how do we build models around them and their operational work styles and their conversational work styles to then create an optimized system, right? And so, I don't have the number offhand, but we've also begun to work with large research and development institutions as well, who also have expertise working in this highly really untapped space around accents and things of that nature, right? And the brilliance is like that's really the first problem you have to solve, right? Before we get to, did you say this item correctly, or did you want to change your order or anything like that? It's largely around, did I understand what you said, right? And fundamentally, that's still been a tough problem to solve, especially when you give accents and the diversity of speakers with noisy backgrounds and a lot of other things that happen in these restaurant spaces. So
yeah, probably loud on those college campuses too, but
it's very loud, very loud.
at least
very
mine
loud.
was.
If you have memory, yes, it's
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. As you can imagine, you get a variety of coherent and incoherent conversations as well, right? So,
Yep, but a lot of fast food orders are made after midnight, so
yes.
probably all good data. But yeah, so shifting gears a bit. So who's on the short list? Who do you want to work with? What brands are you excited to kind of get your hands on?
Yeah, so the big brands we love to work with is, we probably do like the Yum family. They have an, organizational structure across a few brands. I think the elephant in the room is always going to be your behemoths, your Burger Kings of the world, your McDonald's of the world. And I think the brilliance too is just getting novel perspectives on how these technologies can transform, right? We never look at it like we're the only players in the space, but I like to think we've taken a very unique lens at this. And, I think we love to have conversations with these folks in the short term to really show them what we've built and help them accelerate either their internal efforts or their external efforts to bring this to market.
So Derrick, if you had a crystal ball and you could see into the future, what does artificial intelligence look like?
Yeah, so I see two waves of artificial intelligence happening, right? I see the first wave of artificial intelligence really being about needs, right? Which is, hey, I'm understaffed. I need help processing these orders. I think maybe if you all are aware, they're starting to do robotics in back of the house as well, right? Hey, I need this burger flipped and not burned, right? But when I look at it, I also look at like most folks hop on planes every day and the pilots get the plane in the air and they largely don't interact until they land again, unless it's turbulence, right? And so, when we look at artificial intelligence, that need is as industries get transformed, whether it's looking for travel, right? Like right now, I don't have an interface where I can say, hey, American Airlines, I'm willing to travel at any time, but I want the lowest cost and potentially the shortest flight duration over the next 6 months to South Africa, right? That doesn't exist, right? And so, like, those are the places where I feel like artificial intelligence can really accelerate these things. Because I've been to South Africa, I'd love to go back, but like, right now I have to call a travel agency or I have to go around these different processes. And so I think it's, if we're using the cake analogy, the cherry on the top, the frosting, that's where artificial intelligence is going to live right now, right? The plus ones for solutions where people still are doing a lot of work, but they want easy answers. I think long term, what you're going to see around artificial intelligence is it's probably going to go into the concierge market, right? Of like, hey, here's where historically there have been high touch interactions. I think of like, American Express as a concierge lounge, right? And you can pick up the phone and be like, hey, I'm in New York and you think I'm a privileged member. And so like, I want to get into this best restaurant. Can you make that happen for me, right? I see artificial intelligence going into those spaces as well because, right now, the middle class across the globe is growing at an enormous pace, right? And so everybody getting that same level of high touch, white glove service isn't scalable. And so long term, I think that, a lot of folks, I think their anguish is that artificial intelligence might decimate the incoming class of capital, the incoming class of employees. But I largely think it's going to be around how to make the middle class experience more scalable long term, right? Because at the end of the day, when I want to pick up the phone and call American Airlines and be like, hey, I'm a platinum member, they actually don't have enough people to pick up the phone, but there's a level of service I'm used to, right? And so I think you're going to see that happen at scale over the next few years to really accelerate what good customer service looks like for premium members. And I think that's largely going to be driven by intelligent solutions in the machine learning space. So.
Wow, that's a great answer. It's quite the inverse of what people might expect, where it's going to make things more cold and more technology. But you're saying it's going to be more warm and increase hospitality, which is a great way of looking at it. So
that's my vision. Yeah. That's my vision because we've lived through the assistants at our homes, right? If you said, hey, I'm going to go drop this assistant at your favorite brand that you love to go to, you're going to be like, I might as well click this button on Amazon and just get a drop ship, right? As humans, we go for the interaction. We go for the humanity of it all, to be honest, right? And so, I think as solutions can embody more of that, you'll see stronger adoptions. If they're always, more crude, emotionless, you're going to see a lot of people just do it at arm's length, and they largely won't scale, right? I think the installation phase is definitely going to happen. It's the adoption phase that, I think most folks have to worry about. And my analogy here is, QR codes are taking off in the United States right now. This isn't the first time folks have tried QR codes in the United States, right? There was a clear problem this time that accelerated adoption. And I think similar when you look at artificial intelligence and machine learning, there's a clear problem now that's going to accelerate adoption. So
that's great. Well, as we wrap up here with the last question, I want to keep in kind of your theme of the positive, looking at kind of approach and making sure that we kind of stay with that thread. So what is kind of your kind of wrap up words about the future of AI and the impact it's going to have on consumers kind of long term and the positive things that are going to come?
Yeah, so I think, my analogy is like when I was growing up, I wanted the Lionel train set, right? And I found out about that Lionel train set because like Sears back in its heyday used to send catalogs to everybody's house. And they're like, hey, here's the cool stuff that as a kid you want, right? My vision for a future is right now I don't have that as an adult, right? And so when I look at artificial intelligence, it's going to be around personalization. It's going to be around recommendation. I think it's going to be around allowing common folk to have, a really esteemed quality of life that isn't possible today. And that's the vision I'm looking to bring to the world. And that's the vision I think is possible.
That's beautiful and perfectly well said. Derrick, thank you again for joining us today. We loved learning more about MI and, what is artificial intelligence and how it impacts us, today as consumers. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the world of hospitality. That is all for today's episode. See you next time on Be Our Guest with your host, Jen Cameron and Sonia Maroney. Thank you so much, Derrick.
Thank you.